end of day 39 of the Undercover Policing Inquiry, Tranche 2, Phase 2. We've heard the end of the evidence of HN115 Tony Waite, the manager of the Spycops, who went on to be head of C Squad. I'm joined by the massed ranks of the Undercover Research Group, Donal Driscoll and Chris Bryan. Gentlemen, what did you make of today's hearing?
It was all right. It was more the usual. It's more the same as yesterday. He doesn't quite remember. They pushed more on things they hadn't gone through, but it was just, there wasn't that much out of it. And you can see why he finished earlier. He wasn't going to give much more.
Yeah, I mean, most of the slips I thought were most interesting were like kind of little asides, like how did you look Bob Lambert's wife in the face, knowing that, and he was like, well, I'm a policeman, which, was a great...
Lying is second nature to me. Yeah, lying it comes as a second nature to me, yeah.
Yeah, totally.
What did you think of this, maybe not news to you, well, it's not news to anybody really, but the stuff regarding the communications with the pharmaceutical companies and other so-called List X companies?
Yeah, so the List X is usually companies considered to have national security implications or, of sufficient size that they're important. And, it wasn't really new. It's like, they've got an industrial desk. There's clearly links. It's like, if you look at the heads of security of all these companies, they're all security service or special branch connections. So they've got lots of personal little links going on. Like a lot of Waite stuff, it's kind of stuff we knew. He's admitting the cat's out of the bag. It's going to be harder for them to put it in. That's the real value in that. So, we all knew this, but he's the one who's actually saying, well, we're saying it as well now.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think, it's really frustrating because there's actually quite some significant things being admitted to, but they're being admitted to in such an understated way of him just going, it's probable. That we don't really get to pick up on it. There was a lot of stuff just on the further questions about would more training have helped with the sexual relationship stuff. He's like, no, it wouldn't have helped at all. They all knew full well. Would you have benefited from greater training? Oh, I probably would have.
But this is his whole management style, hands off, not ask any questions. It's just like, don't see, don't tell. For what I don't know, I can't be accountable for. And it's going to come up with many of the other managers. He's just the first in the line of, we just went on with what was going on, and there's no training, there's no real processes, there's no real institutional learning, and there's no idea, there's no real clarity of what special branch training actually means. It's like the manager gets parachuted into the job. There's no handovers. It's just like, so where's the institutional learning? Always like, we did this wrong, we thought it up on the spot, and then, but how did you pass that on? There's something, Special Branch is not looking very good in this, and he's a good example of why they don't look good.
I mean, there's a lot of sort of references about how, things wouldn't be written down. Yes, we'd have the weekly meetings, but it was more in the corridors that things were decided. I mean, he said the majority of business within Special Branch was done informally with no paper trail. And that seems to have been done on purpose. He seems quite clear about that. And we were saying earlier in one of the earlier videos, that seemed to really leak into their reports because they were sometimes quite unguarded accidentally in their reports. And that was simply because they were used to being unguarded, because most of the time things weren't being written down at all.
And most of the time stuff is just literally going into files. We still don't understand what the majority of this work was actually going towards. It's like, yes, there's the stuff going to MI5, there's the stuff that's useful for informants, but there's a lot of stuff simply going into the files, repeatedly going into files. One of the things about Waite is he goes on to head C Squad and oversee SDS, but we're left, and I was hoping today we would get a clear picture about what that meant. The statement was done in advance for it, but we're still none the wiser about what actually C Squad believed remit was. It's very amorphous. It's starting to exist for its own sake.
There's the Freemasons question, which was answered. He said he was in, Tony Waite, that he was in the Freemason, but the follow-up question was Scott also a Freemason? And the reason behind that question was that somehow Scott somehow influenced Waite in terms of that maybe he was a superior in the Freemasons to him. But he said he didn't know anything about Scott's membership there.
Yeah, I think it was also I was pushing for that because there is something very strange about how Waite protected Scott and overrode, and still does, and he still considers a good officer. It's like one thing about Waite is he doesn't see anybody as having done anything bad. It's like as long as their intelligence output was good, but we're still left with not knowing what that intelligence output was put to. He's like, oh, it's just good. It's just good. But yeah, there's something not answered fully about Scott, and there was no questions about the cabal, the set of undercovers who basically tried to protect Scott, and some of the other managers we're hoping will be asked about questions about that.
Yeah, he was quite strong on the. He was asked again about Dines in the further questions. And he was still yes, absolutely. Dines deserved his commendation. He didn't see an issue about the fact that Dines had emotionally and sexually deceived Helen Steele. He said he knew who Helen Steele was, didn't know that they were close. It was pointed out to him that he would have seen photos of them together, part of his role, and he's like, I don't remember that. We were shown the note about the commendation, and it was like, oh yeah, the ceremony, Dines didn't want his wife there. And like just little sort of these little brief glimpses of there's something else going on, and something which was brought up in the questions. They didn't say where it came from, but I know that it comes from Dines' statement that there's this whole thing about McDonald's knowing that there was an undercover officer inside London Greenpeace, and there was a whole line of questioning around the communications that was taking place with the companies. You mentioned the List X companies, but I mean McDonald's isn't a List X company, right? But he said, oh yeah, it's very possible, because he admitted it's highly possible that the industrial desk at Special Branch were communicating with McDonald's and were passing information on, but there's no way it would have been individual information. At least he doesn't know. He shouldn't be. He said he wouldn't know, but He said he claimed to be surprised to know that McDonald's knew that there was an undercover officer.
Yeah, and this really begs a bunch of questions. It's just like it meant other people in Special Branch knew who those officers were to communicate that. So either those officers were an open secret in Special Branch, or it's somebody at quite a high level who would have had that knowledge speaking to Special Branch. Either way, it's not looking good for them. It's like, and there is a point, it doesn't matter that they don't know who it is, although he probably could have worked it out, given how many there were on the covers, or private agents. But you can see this is where the information starts to slip, and their idea that they're super secret and super protective, not really standing up to scrutiny.
Yeah, that certainly came up again when he was talking about the passing on of information to A8. It was one of the last questions. And it was said, how would you pass this information on to A8? Would you give them the raw intelligence? Would you give them the reports? And he was like, oh, no, it would be sanitized in some form. We'd phone them up or have a chat with them. It was very informal. And it's again, this informal basis that means that there's no real recording of it. And he was trying to suggest that A8 wouldn't have known anything about the deployment of undercover officers. He says when he was at A8, he didn't know that the SDS ran undercover officers. But there's no, without any, there's no sign that actually that was the case. They seem all dreadfully good chaps having healthy conversations in the corridor. Who knows what information is being passed on? We've heard from other officers that the SDS was an open secret within Special Branch. The idea that nobody knew what they were doing is increasingly laughable, right?
To be honest, Special Branch come off like a gossip circle. It's like it seems that everybody is basically standing in the corridors just talking about openly about the state secrets. So
yeah. Anything else you want to add about?
So I did have something. They actually have the inquiry have published the documents for today's hearing on the website. I know they've still got. Not the most helpful thing, of course, would actually be Tony Waite's written statement. That, as with all the other officers since November, still haven't been published, which is really frustrating, I find. But one of the little things which was picked up, maybe it was a question that you was like about this existence of this file specific. So in the Special Branch, they have this sort of general registry, but then they have these special ones called prefix 588 and the green files. And they seem the question was asked whether there was a specific file purely dedicated to arrests of SDS officers, which Waite of course didn't know anything about that. That appeared on the top of one of the documents. I think I just skimmed through. So on that nerdy note.
Yeah, the importance of the 588 or green files is they're what the managers saw, the senior managers in the special branch. So it goes to knowledge of issues within the unit. So, and unfortunately, most of those managers are now dead. They can't be questioned. Waite's one of the more senior ones we've heard to from date. So the more intelligence that comes out about that, the more we get an overall picture about who knew what and what actually their policy response. Mostly it was nothing, we could tell that. But there are a few things that will come out in the next set of hearings where they do start making some changes in response to the increasingly growing problems within the SDS.
I mean, there was something which saying about what senior officers knew. We saw a report about a visitor visiting a more senior officers to the SDS safe house, and Waite was asked, how much access did they have? He was, complete access to all the files in the safe house, complete access to all the officers. They could ask them about their deployments, and they would chat with them. And it was like, so what did they know about, for example, the use of dead children's identities? Oh, they would have known, but they weren't interested. And there's this sort of we saw a similar thing with his answer to his questions about the wives. It's like, they wouldn't have been bothered. Most of them didn't know, but they could have known, but they didn't. So anyway, they weren't bothered anyway. And this is, this seemed to be his approach generally.
Yeah. And he keeps talking about people having affairs, as if it's like, and he didn't seem to get the point that affairs are done with mutual consent, at least between the parties, but usually involve hurting one or two other parties because they're secret. It's just like, men just have affairs. That's fine. Women aren't allowed to have affairs, but the men have affairs, and that's what these were. And it's just like, and Barr did actually. Well, what about informed consent?
He was much more direct than that. Barr says these were not affairs, were they? And he goes, I think they were affairs. He wasn't having it that they weren't. Police Spies Out of Lives have been very, very clear in the language that they've been pushing forward. It's like these are not affairs. They've called it every single time. Tony Waite doesn't care. As far as he's concerned, they're affairs, and that's that. And he doesn't think it's an issue. He said certainly earlier on he was saying that it didn't affect any good marriages. The good marriages continued because
part of the work. Yeah. Part of the work to put up with your husbands sleeping with a whole bunch of other women. That's just part and parcel.
And how complicit they were in covering up for if they knew about the relationships, they knew about it, and it's going to come back. It's like they preferred to have married men, because it gave stability, but there's no consideration for the wives, and something that's been missing really from the inquiry so far, is the voice of the wives themselves. I'm really, really interested to hear what their response is, because Mrs. Lambert, who does he speak to? There's Matt Rayner's partner, who seems to have settled this, but where's her comment on this? Has this been settled? Has this thing, or did what appears to be the case in most cases, the marriage just broke down? It's like the SDS was a death knell for most marriages, from what the surface evidence appears to be. So for the managers Waite to go on about how it's okay for the wives. I'm not. We can't accept that at face value.
And God knows what Mrs. Waite thinks. Quite frankly, the way that he talks about her is bad enough. Do you know what I mean? Jesus. It's an early finish today, which is fantastic. We're not sitting tomorrow. On Thursday, we've got Michael Couch, who was apparently the officer who picked up the photo of Belinda and Bob Lambert when they raided Bob Lambert's flat as part of the cover raid in order to cover the fact they were raiding loads of other people. I'm not sure what else he's going to be questioned about apart from that.
So he's basically the sort of admin role within the thing, collecting the reports. He's a detective sergeant. So, I've read a statement. I can't really say more than that. I'm going to shrug about. Potentially not. Right. I think next week is going to be much, much more interesting. I think there's some two very big names next week that are well worth listening into.
Yeah, next week we've got Eric Docker, who's appearing in person, which has been a while for this inquiry. We haven't had many people appearing in person for a while. And then HN115, who won't be appearing in person, but if you want to hear what he's got to say, you have to come to the hearing. It won't be broadcast. The recording won't be kept.
And his voice is going to be modulated on top of that, which seems, I just don't understand why you would need that. What is it? What role does he have that like hundreds of people are going to recognise his voice 30 years on? Is he like, what? I don't get it.
But his evidence is going to be really important.
Yeah, incredibly important. I mean, he is the only manager who the Met Police are standing by as being a good manager of the SDS, the only competent one. Suggests that he's still. I mean, it seems quite a long time, but maybe he's still got a role with the Met Police. Who knows? Seems unlikely, but you never know. We don't think so. No, fair enough. But yeah, I mean, his evidence will be fascinating. Is there anything else you want to add before we sign off? Right, well, thanks for joining. We won't be back tomorrow. Hooray, we've got a day off. If anybody, I'll be doing a Twitter Spaces this evening. I'm not sure what time, at some point later. It's early. Maybe I'll go and do something with my day. Good God. But yeah, we'll be back on Thursday. Tune in from 10 a.m. It will be live streamed as far as I'm aware. I'm not sure why this afternoon wasn't live streamed. There was a video for it, and then in big letters it was like, there is no live stream this afternoon. Don't know what that was about. Sorry for misleading people by saying there was going to be. See you all on Thursday. Thanks for joining.